Thank you, everyone. So the title is Stupid Mistakes That Smart People Make, but also, hopefully usefully, what you can do about them. Now, this image you're looking at here are two stupid people. They are taking part in an annual event that takes place in the southwest of England, which is a cheese race. Yeah, that's right, a cheese race. So I'm going to show you, Marek, can you run the first clip, the first video, please? Okay, so there, that white thing, that's the cheese. It's thrown down a very steep hill, and then a series of very stupid people run after it. And many of them fall over. Some of them hurt themselves quite seriously, and every year more come back and try again. And sometimes they are quite seriously hurt. So I think we could agree that stupid people making stupid mistakes is quite funny, but it's of no great consequence, it's no big deal. Smart people making stupid mistakes, now that's interesting. Why it is that smart people, and I'm doing inclusive gesture, smart people make stupid mistakes is quite interesting. So, question, how smart are we feeling today? And there's a prize. So this is also, like Molly, this is an interactive talk. The prize for anyone who can get through the next half hour without making a stupid mistake is a copy of my book. Now, okay, you're laughing. He's giving away merchandise, no big deal. There's a bookmark in the book, which is a €50 note, to anyone who can get through the next half hour without making a stupid mistake. So how smart are we feeling? Here's the interactive, one of the interactive bits. So I'm going to do now something which, when we were in the BBC Academy, we used to call it an observation test. But every now and again, somebody would fail, and it was really embarrassing. So we call it an observation experiment. Okay? So what I need you to do is to observe me and do exactly as I do. Okay? Everyone? So put your arms out in front of you. Put your laptops down if you've got a laptop. Arms out in front. Everyone arms out in front? Okay. Everyone raise one arm above the other. Cross your arms over. Twist your wrists around. Okay. Grip your fingers together really tight. Now the key here is to point your index fingers and tap them together. So tap, 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 that's it. Okay. Now do that. Okay. That's going in my pocket. So, how smart are we feeling now? Now, I'm going to tell you a few stories. I'm a journalist by background. I have made mistakes. Some of them on air. Some of them I still cringe about, even now. But the journalist I'm going to tell you about now is not me. It's someone else, a guy called Ross. And Ross was a journalist. Oh, he's been a journalist for a long time. And back in the 80s, he was covering stories about the environment when nobody else really was. And he attended a conference like this one about overpopulation. And it was a very gloomy, prophetic, dismal, apocalyptic set of studies about how the Earth couldn't support the number of people living on it even now. And he was thinking, oh, gosh, this is really gloomy. How am I going to get an angle on this story that isn't really gloomy? Because I need to sell it to people. I need to get attention for it. Then he realized that one of the academics up on the stage was herself pregnant. And he thought, that's it. That's my angle. Despite all the doom and gloom, she has found personal hope. And she's bringing a new life into the world. Isn't that fantastic? So he ran with that as his hook, his angle on the story. And it went in a national publication. And the next day, the academic rang him up and said, I'm not pregnant. How smart are we feeling now? Interestingly, even though that wasn't your mistake, you all went, ooh. And actually, some people, when they're telling that story, they actually, ooh. Imagine if that was your mistake. When we make a mistake, and it's a stupid mistake, it's emotionally incredibly powerful. We actually try and make ourselves a bit smaller. We talk about wanting, I don't know if this translates, we want the ground to open up and swallow us. You know that translates into Estonian? The word we use in English sometimes is, I was mortified. In other words, nearly dead. Mortified by my mistake. So, make no mistakes. Mistakes are incredibly, emotionally powerful things. And if you don't accept that, you're in trouble. Our minds exist to predict what will happen next. So says Brian Boyd in a study on why we tell stories. Why do humans tell stories? And he says it's because stories are a really good way of trying to work out what happens next. Because in any situation, What is the most unpredictable thing, typically? Well, typically, it's other people. And so we tell stories about other people because we're trying to constantly rehearse, trying to work out. So I'm going to give you an example of how this works. And it works very often in our favor. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman called Linda. And I want you to create a mental picture of Linda as I tell this story, okay? So, Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. We could change that. She majored in UX. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with discrimination and social justice. She also participated in anti-nuclear demos. Okay, has everybody got a picture of Linda? Does everyone know a Linda? Okay. So what I want you to do from this story is work out what happened next after she left university. Where is she now? Which is most probable? Is it A, Linda works in a call center? Or B, Linda works in a call center and is an active feminist blogger? Okay, you can't sit on the fence. A or B. Anyone hands up for A? That's half a hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Hands up for B. Okay, that's pretty much typical the response I get wherever I do this test. Journalists particularly go for B. Right, so let's look at Linda, not as a story, but as a maths problem. So let's assume that this pool here is all the adult women in the UK, 25 million. This pool here are the women working in call centers. About 2 million. It's a very popular occupation. 2 million women working in call centers. This pool here represents active feminist bloggers in the UK. Let's say 50,000, right, sake of argument. That pool there represents women who work in call centers and are active feminist bloggers. So if you said B, and most of you did say B, you're betting that Linda is more likely to be in that group than that group, those of you who said A, even though you weren't really sure. And you probably said A because you thought it was a trick. Now, if I asked you to put your hand in your pocket and take out 50 euros of your money and place a bet, where would you place your money? A or B? Oh, yeah, well, A is the smart money. This is what is known as the narrative fallacy. We have a limited ability to look at any sequence of facts without weaving an explanation into them. And that's from Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan. We can't look at facts without imagining a story. You didn't want Linda just to be working in a call center because that's not a happy ending. Why would Linda, this feisty, ballsy woman we knew when she was a student, just be working in a call center? I tried this experiment in RTE in Ireland with journalists there, and one of them had voted for A, and I said, so why did you go for A? And he said, well, you know, as people get older, some of them become more conservative. I think Linda's become a bit of a Tory, a bit of a conservative in her old age. And I said, mate, she doesn't exist. She's a maths problem. She's not a real person. But he had basically got the right answer accidentally by telling a different story. So the narrative fallacy is incredibly powerful. This is why I loved being a journalist, because I loved weaving stories out of facts. It's also why I left being a journalist, because I got tired of doing it. I got tired of squeezing real lives into stories. So the narrative fallacy is very powerful. But what do we do then when stories and facts collide? What happens when stories and facts collide, mostly, is confirmation bias. The study done, a very famous study done of Democratic and Republican voters in America. And they believe a story about the world, depending on which party they support. And when confronted with facts that go against that story they believe, what do you think they do? Do they think they change their story, or do they dismiss the fact? Well, we know they dismiss the fact. They stop believing it. They don't believe the person who's told them it. They stick to the story rather than believe the new fact. That's called confirmation bias. What can we do about it? I said this is about giving you some tips. What can you do about it? So I'll give you an example that's close to my heart. In the UK, since 9/11, we've had a series of very negative stories about Muslims in the UK. It's not surprising, given the events of the last 15, 16 years. And so you end up in conversations in the UK about all Muslims this and all Muslims that. And it's a bit depressing, especially when the fact is that in the survey of UK Muslims, only 4% of UK Muslims express any sympathy whatsoever with terrorists or terrorist actions or terrorists' aims. Only 4%. But try and get that figure across against this tide The fact is fighting a load of stories. So when I have these conversations now, what I do is I go, okay, do you remember this guy? Now, you may not know this story, not being in the UK, but this is Muhammad Mahmood. And when a white man tried to kill worshippers outside a mosque in Finsbury Park in London, he crashed his van into a crowd. He killed one man, he injured others. The crowd were not surprisingly enraged, and they attacked the van driver. Muhammad Mahmood came out of the mosque, and he protected the van driver. And he saved that man's life. And he kept him safe until the police arrived and arrested him. So what I say to someone who says, oh, all Muslims the same, all Muslims, I said, remember the story of the guy outside Finsbury Park Mosque, the guy who came out and saved that man's life, even though really he deserved what he was going to get. And in the space, that creates a gap within the broader spread of stories. One story creates a gap among the others. And in that gap, I can say, oh, and did you realize that only 4% in a survey, I can get the fact in. So when you are faced with bad stories, and there are lots of bad stories out there. When you are faced with bad stories, the Get Smarter tip, this comes from Sean Callahan in a great book. The Get Smarter tip is, first of all, yes, acknowledge the bad story. Yes, terrorist acts are terrible. Then tell your good story. Do you remember the guy? Yeah? And then, and only then, can you talk about the facts. You have to tell a story to earn the right to talk about the facts. So you cannot defeat bad stories with facts. You can only defeat them with better stories and facts. So that's my first tip. Tell good stories to defeat bad stories. Now, a little experiment. I need to divide the room in half in a moment, because what I'm going to get you to do is imagine you are a patient, and you've been told by your doctor you've got a cancerous lump, a lump that needs to be dealt with. You've got two choices. You could either have chemotherapy, which is going to be time-consuming and painful, or you can have surgery, which is quick. But surgery carries risks. So what I'm going to get you to do is from that pillar that way, you guys are the red team. From the pillar that way, you are the blue team. Okay? So, instructions. I would like the red team to now close your eyes. Please. This side of the room, red team, close your eyes. Because blue team, I'm going to give you a key fact about surgery. And your key fact is this. Okay? Everyone got it? Okay, red team, open your eyes. Blue team, no cheating. You've lost the money already. There's no point cheating. Blue team, please close your eyes. Okay, red team, I'm going to give you a key fact about the surgery. Okay? Everyone got it? Okay, you can all open your eyes. So I now need you to do a quick vote. What I need you to know is, do you want to go for surgery, yes or no? So, put your hand up, yes for surgery. Okay. I'm going to say there's slightly more on the red side than the blue side. Slightly more. Okay, why is that? So, what are the facts I gave you? Blue, I told there was a 10% fatality rate attached to surgery. Red, I said there was a 90% survivability rate. Mathematically, you're ahead of me. Mathematically, these two things are the same. But let's be honest, survivability sounds nicer than fatality. And therefore, there were slightly more people on the red side of the room went for surgery. Even medical students, when put through this A/B testing, this blind testing, even medical students go the same way. Because some things sound better than others, even though they're exactly the same. This is reframing or framing. And framing is really, really key, and you'll hear advertisers and politicians doing it all the time. You can do it too. If you are trying to work on a project that has, problems attached to it, think about how you could reframe the thing you're talking about, the thing you're working on. So describe your project, and then see, how can I say it differently? So what other terms can I use? If you haven't already tried it, use the thesaurus. You look up synonyms and antonyms. So synonyms are words that mean similar. Antonyms are words that mean opposite. So fatality and survivability are antonyms. So look up alternative ways of describing it. And then go, well, can I see it differently? And the great trick for seeing something differently is go and ask someone else. Go and ask someone else to look at it for you or with you and see how they see it. So this is just a really simple thing. How does the thing you're trying to do appear to different people? How can you see it differently? How can you say it differently? And reframing is not very difficult, but it's difficult enough that most people never bother to do it. Most people never bother to reframe a problem. They never bother to, somebody gives them a problem within a frame, and we never bother to challenge the frame. This can have very serious consequences. When the Americans invaded Iraq and occupied Iraq, the occupation was beset with problems. And part of the problem was about what the Americans told the Iraqis would happen. They said life after Saddam would be better. And in the post-war review of the mistakes they made, the Americans accepted that when they said better, the Americans meant not being ruled by a brutal dictator. When the Iraqis heard better, they thought it meant reliable electricity, food, medical care, jobs, and safety from criminals. So the word better meant different things. And nobody on the American side had bothered to attempt to reframe that problem and see how do other people see this. In fact, the weird thing was the Iraqis used to say to the American occupying forces, how come you can put a man on the moon, but you can't fix the electricity in Baghdad? So the Iraqis actually assumed that chaos was intended rather than accidental. That's how powerful the framing is. There's an American psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, refers to this by its own kind of unwieldy acronym of WYSIATI, which stands for what you see is all there is. So left to our own devices, what we see inside the frame is that's all we think about. So like a horse wearing blinkers, we don't see the stuff around the blinkers. Now, blinkers are actually very effective. They allow a horse to go very fast in a straight line. So they do a job, and framing does a job. It allows us to do things very quickly and effectively. But of course, it leaves us open to being blindsided. So what you see as all there is means we are very good at the known knowns, the stuff in front of us. We can deal with that. We're kind of vaguely aware that there are known unknowns. There might be stuff outside the frame. We are absolutely normally unaware of the unknown unknowns. There are things out there we don't even know that we don't know yet. And we are 99% of the time, 99% of most of us are oblivious to that fact, even though that's the stuff that's going to trip us up. What about data, I hear you say? Surely data is going to solve this problem for us and allow us to make smarter decisions. Smarter, better decisions, fewer mistakes because of data. In God we trust, everyone else bring data, says the American, is an American mantra. And surely this is the answer. There's more data out there than ever before. All we have to do is get smarter at using it. How many of you here work with data all the time? Data scientists, data architects, analysts? Great. Okay. I'll tell you a data story from the early days of data journalism. When I was working in the BBC in the 1990s, we started getting data from schools. They started publishing league tables of school performance based on exam results. And so for the first time ever, we could say, here are the top 10 best schools in the country. Here are the bottom 10 worst schools in the country. That is the worst school in England. And it was a good headline. Okay? Now, it didn't really tell us anything we didn't already know, which was that bad schools tended to be in working class areas with lots of social disadvantages. And they tended to be the schools that performed the worst. Okay? The second year, we got year-on-year data. The data got richer. We could compare. Oh, that school is the most improved school in Manchester. This school is the least improved school in Cheshire. Right? The data got richer. By the time we'd gone through 5 or 6 years of this, the data was really rich. We could say, here's a school that, despite the fact it's in a middle-class area and has all the advantages, is doing quite badly comparatively. That's a school which, despite the fact it's in a working-class area, is doing really well. So the data was very rich. And we thought the stories were getting better as a result. Then we started to realize that things were happening behind the data. What was happening was that schools were keeping students back from exams if they thought they were going to fail. Rather than take a hit to their league table, they wouldn't put a kid who was borderline into an exam he might fail. Worse still, they were excluding troublesome kids because they were going to drag their figures down even further. So the data, and bear in mind, this wasn't happening despite the data, this was happening because of the data. The data was hurting the children who needed schools most. If you want to know about mistakes, ask an engineer, somebody who fixes stuff. A mate of mine is a chocolate engineer. He actually works in a chocolate factory, fixing machines on the chocolate factory production line. He's not a Loompa Loompa. He's a very nice man. And he told me that they've recently gone through a total quality management system where everything they do is a value-driven decision. Value-driven decision-making. Value-based, whatever. You get the idea. Data-based decision-making. So every time a machine breaks down in the factory, not only does he fix it, but he writes a data report on what's gone wrong, including the 5 whys. You know, the Toyota 5 whys, why, to get to the root cause of the problem. So he goes, why did the machine break down? Because the motor failed. Why did the motor fail? Well, because it reached the end of its lifespan. Why? Because it did. Why? Well, because things get older. That's what happens. Why? We're all going to die. We're all getting older. I don't know. It takes him an hour, sometimes, to write the data report on the machine he's just fixed. In that hour, people are knocking on the door saying, something else is broken. And he said to his boss, look, people are knocking on the door of the office and saying, come and fix the next thing that's broken. You know what his boss said? Lock the door. Not surprisingly, my friend is leaving the industry. 30 years of experience, he's not ready to be treated like a machine. And he's quitting. So, Ed Catmull at Pixar has a great way of approaching data. They use data all the time. But he says, you measure what you can. You evaluate what you measure. But you appreciate you cannot measure the vast majority of what you do. Anything to do with humans is very hard to really measure. The vast majority of what we do. So if a friendly robot comes towards you with data, or an academic, or a UX architect, or a scientist, comes to you with some data, I would say, ask 3 things. 1, did gathering this data affect what was being measured in any way? Like the schools. What could have been measured but wasn't? And finally, what matters but can't be measured? And I would say anything human, deep, deep, deep down, is very hard to measure. This is my biggest bias, optimism bias. I'm just, by nature, very optimistic. That's why I'm late for places, because I think it'll take me 5 minutes to get there, and it takes me 20. So I am, by nature, an optimist. It's not a bad bias to have. Nothing would ever happen. Entrepreneurs are typically suffering from optimism bias, but nothing ever happens without it. So I'm generally happy about mistakes. We've all been told that without mistakes, nothing new happens. Okay, that's true. It's obviously true. If you think about it, epic fail plus the ability to bounce back equals epic win. Marek, could you play the last video for me, please? This is a video of people who are doing awesome, epic things. Here we go. Look at these guys. Look at these guys. Now imagine how many times they fell flat, how many times they failed, how many mistakes they made before they were able to do that. Awesome. Look at that. How many times do you reckon they failed before they pulled that off? So there's no epic win. There is no epic win without some epic fails along the way and the ability to bounce back from them. Okay, so we all make mistakes, but you have to acknowledge that they are emotionally fraught, and you have to find some way of taking the emotion out of them. Otherwise, people won't want to make them. And finally, you have to realize that teams beat biases, and I'll show you why in a second. First of all, let's just talk about emotion and mistakes. Suppose I gave you a toss of a coin experiment. Okay, toss of a coin, heads, you lose 10,000 euro of your own money. Yep. So, how much will I have to offer you for you to take that bet? Would you do it if I offered you 10,000 to win? 10,000 to lose, 10,000 to win? No. Would anyone take it for 10,000 euros? How much would you need? Shout out a figure. How much would you want to take that bet? 20,000. Anyone higher than 20? 60?
1 million.
You want €1 million. Right. €1 million. Okay, that's the highest we've ever had. €1 million. This is called loss aversion. And this is the emotional attachment we have to the stuff we've got. So it is emotionally more painful to lose something you've got than it is emotionally satisfying to win something you haven't got. Loss aversion is incredibly powerful. Poker players know this, And it's called in poker being married to your hand. If you've already bet quite heavily, and then your hand turns out to be a bit shit, you keep betting, because to stop betting and fold would be to lose all that stuff you've put in the pot. A colleague of mine at the BBC said, oh, I had a boyfriend like that. I'd been going out with him for 3 years. It wasn't working, but I thought, if I finish with him now, I've wasted the last 3 years. So you can think of this as the bad boyfriend fallacy, but its technical name is the sunk cost fallacy. And the sunk cost fallacy is the mistake of fixing on costs that have gone. They're sunk. You can't get them back. Now, under your chairs, you've got a bit of paper, which is an attempt at origami to get around the sunk cost fallacy. So, on this piece of paper, you imagine you've got a project you're working on, and it's going badly, right? It's really going badly. So, what you do is you start off by saying, okay, what's the problem with the project? How likely are we to succeed? Let's be honest, how likely is this to work? What are the costs of continuing? How much more are we going to have to spend to get to the end? What are the costs of stopping? Because there may be costs of actually stopping, okay? Should we continue or should we stop? And then there's a dotted line. And underneath the dotted line, you write, how much have we spent so far? And that might be time, it might be money, it might be prestige. How much have we spent so far? Then here's the clever bit. You fold along the dotted line. He says, you fold along the dotted line and turn the page over, and what you realize is that what you've spent so far becomes the top of a page which says, what have we learned? And who else needs to learn the lessons? So the costs that have gone become the cost of the lesson you learned. Now you turn the page back again, and you answer that question, should we carry on or should we stop? But you've hidden the sunk costs. What you've spent so far, you can never get back. Therefore, why think about it? It's a sunk cost. It's a bad boyfriend. Don't think about it. Just think about what's the chances of succeeding and decide whether to go ahead. So that little bit of origami can just help you to deal with the emotional side by reframing it. The sunk costs are the cost of the lesson learned. Smart teams, how smart are we still feeling? Smart teams beat biases. I need a volunteer from the front row to come up on the stage. Peter, come on up on the stage. So, we're going to do the finger experiment again, okay? This time, you guys are going to watch. You're going to do it with me, Peter. Okay, so, arms out in front of you. One arm, no, you guys just watch, you watch. One arm above the other, cross your arms over, twist. Grip together, grip really tight, come on, tight, pointy fingers. Okay, tap your fingers together. Okay, you saw it, well done. Who saw the trick? Yeah, you break your grip. Okay, so the trick is, you go, no, do this. And you point with your right hand while your left hand does that. And then you come back together and go. It's a misdirection trick. But it nicely, if you learn one thing at the conference this week, it is how to mess with kids' heads. But also, it illustrates very nicely what psychologists have known for years, which is that observers are more likely to see a mistake than participants. So the person up on stage with you, very rarely, well done, Peter, very rarely spots the trick. It's always the audience who spot the trick. So if you have a team, a smart team, a diverse team, who see the world differently, and you enable them to call out your mistake without any fear, that's how you beat your biases, by getting the observers around you to see the mistake you can't see. That's the best hope we've got, is smart teams to beat our own personal biases. But you have to have the right culture. You have to be honest, you have to be candid. You have to have all the right things in place. You can't have any fear, it has to have trust. So I guess the point is, try not to make stupid mistakes, but don't be so scared of them that you never make any mistakes, because you never know, one of your mistakes one day might be brilliant. So that's it. Thank you very much, guys.